And we're live. So thanks everyone for joining us on Facebook. My name's Elias. I'm a Youth Advisory Council member from Exploring the Link, and we're here partnering with YouthRex, who's going to tell you a bit about themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clementine. I'm a research assistant at Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange, or in short, YouthRex. YouthRex is in Ontario. YouthRex's vision is an Ontario where shared knowledge is a transformative positive impact for all youth. And to simply put it, it means that we make sure that everyone who's in part of the Ontario's youth sector has the knowledge that they need to, improve youth outcomes in whatever work they do. What makes YouthRex very special is that we understand that knowledge comes from not just research, but also practice and lived experience. And that means that youth like Amina and I have a role in creating knowledge as well. And as a research assistant, I've really developed a really good understanding of research and evaluation and why it's also really important for youth programs. In YouthRex's website, we have the community board and a knowledge hub. And the community board is really your go-to place for anything happening in the youth sector, whether it's funding, whether it's online webinars, whether it's events, jobs, anything that you're really looking for, that's where you find it. And also the knowledge hub has over 1,000 resources on issues that involve youth, such on education, mental health, substance use, youth engagement, so much more. So if you have the time, do make sure you check that out. And Amina, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well this evening. My name is Amina Hagar, and I'm also a YouthRex research assistant. And over the last few months, I've been working to support a lot of the events and ongoing projects and the Knowledge Hub, which I'll share with you in just a second. So right over here, we have the Knowledge Hub, which is a library of resources such as research summaries, evidence briefs, and that provide youth organizations with a collection of best practices they can use. You should definitely have toolkits, actually, and we also have a certificate for
Oops, sorry, Amina. I think
the provincial government of Ontario. It's a
I think we're losing you a little bit.
Okay. Let me just exit. Should. Okay. Do you have, okay. Okay. So it is a self-guided professional development course that provides youth workers with evidence-based information such health, social, and legal risks associated with cannabis use. And within that, we also had an event called Looking Through the Kaleidoscope of Cannabis. And with our honored guest today was the keynote speaker, which was amazing. And I was a part of, I was able to attend the event, and I learned a lot. We had educators, youth workers, and researchers come in and had this really collaborative and organic conversations about what it means to serve youth and have these, like, have these conversations in these spaces. And it was definitely an educational experience. And I will definitely recommend you check out our website. We have amazing resources that I use myself as a student, and you can definitely use that to kind of gain your knowledge and share with anybody that you want to, anybody within the community or within the sector that could benefit from it. Moving forward, I will introduce our honored guest today. Dr. Oyedeji Ayonrinde is an associate professor at psychiatry at Queen's University in Ontario. He's trained and worked at Bethlehem Royal and Mountsley Hospitals in the UK before moving to Canada. He also worked as a medical director of the Early Psychosis Intervention Program of Southeast Ontario. As a specialist in both addiction and psychiatry, Oyedeji has worked actively involved in research and intervention aimed at awareness and reducing risk of psychosis in youth and young adults. Additional qualifications include research in psychiatry, history of medicine, executive MBA from Imperial College London. He's also received a number of knowledge and innovation awards that include the Canadian Partners in Research and the National Biomedical Science Ambassador Award in 2019 for the Cannabis Awareness Initiatives. These are amazing achievements, and as somebody who's actually heard Dr. Ayonrinde speak, it's an honor to have you here today. So.
Awesome, thank you, Mina. Yeah, and I just want to remind everyone watching that this is an Ask the Expert, and we will prioritize the questions we get in the comments. So if you have anything you want to ask Deji, then just drop them in the comments, and we'll get right to it. So Mina, I'll take you out of the stream, and we'll get right started. Cool. So I'll start us off with one of the questions that we had prepared. So does weed help us deal with the madness the virus has created, get along better with the people we're with, or not feeling so lonely? So Deji, any insights on this?
Great. Well, good evening, and thanks for the invitation. We'll try and keep it real and live and as uncut as can be. So it's a sort of triple barrel question, or quadruple barrel. We'll take it one by one. Does it help us deal with the madness the virus has created? By that, I suspect whoever's asking the question is talking about not madness as in, and I use the word in quotes, psychosis or severe mental illness, but just the feelings of despair, upset, sorrow, isolation that's come with the virus, and being, for most people, housebound and in isolation. So does it help? Help is a really relative thing. So if you're home feeling really panicked and anxious, really worried and scared, could cannabis help you in those sort of situations? We'll keep it real. For some people, they may find a particular proportion of cannabis use may help them relax a bit better. Some people may use to try and improve their sleep and feel more relaxed or deal with the isolation with the passage of time. But therein also may come some risks, depending on how much is used, how frequently it's used, whether it's smoked or ingested as an edible. So I'll expatiate on that during some of the answers, because it's really important to start off with a really clear point. There's no single cannabis. And if there's no single cannabis, then it's difficult to comment in the general sense of it. But it'll be fair to say some people may feel they're getting some benefits. Get along better with people we're with, or not feeling so lonely. So I would say inherent in that question, that what's being asked is, does cannabis help us improve our relationships? I think in relationships is primarily us, and then the cannabis or alcohol or any other substance does. So if you're not having a great time with someone, or you've got a cranky personality, or you're going through a difficult time, it's not going to make you suddenly really, really nice and so on. So I think my simple answer is you can't generalize to any of these questions. Different strokes for different folks. On the whole, with the virus, smoking, and I'll elaborate on that, actually increases the risk of respiratory risk. So with the virus, I presume we're referring to coronavirus and COVID-19. With the virus, smoking would always be a negative factor, because anything that worsens or potentially worsens respiratory health makes us more vulnerable to coronavirus. So long answer, but that'll teach the person to ask me a quadruple barrel question.
Awesome, thank you, Deji. Clementine, do you want to ask this next one?
So the next question says, I'm wondering if my LP will have all the products that I need.
Right. So my reading of the word LP here will be licensed producer. And licensed producer, if we're speaking of Ontario, will be, well, cannabis stores that are registered through in Ontario. So we probably have a whole range of providers, the licensed producers, the gray market, the black markets, the weed man or woman. So would they have all the products you would need? In Ontario, it's probably best to go online and check the Ontario Cannabis Store, and they'll have the product stock online on their website. So if there's sufficient supplies or there's a shortage or things are out of stock, with some of the relaxation that's going on, people may be able to access in-store or near-store deliveries now. However, it's difficult to say because this question is pretty much asking, is there stock? And one, I don't know what product you're looking for. Two, I don't know where you are. And three, whether or not it's in stock.
Awesome. Thank you, Deji. So the next one we have is how people manage to live without it.
That's certainly an interesting question. How people manage to live without. The majority of people are not consumers of cannabis. So while many, many, many people consume cannabis, the larger proportion of people who use are younger people. So you've got brackets between the age of 15 to 19, then range of 20 to 24. And actually, as we grow older, people consume cannabis less. Although in Canada, we've got a really interesting spike. That's grandma and grandpa. And we've now got a whole range of older people who are beginning to consume cannabis. Now, live without, we don't know from this question whether the person's talking of for medicinal purposes or for recreational purposes. But a lot of people live without cannabis use, and they live happy, healthy lives. Some people are dependent, some are not dependent. But a lot of people do live happy, fulfilling lives. And on the whole, the research and the evidence that Canada collects annually suggests that with age, consumption reduces.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to remind everyone who's watching that if you have a question, please throw it in the chat and we will get Deji to answer it for you. There is a little bit of a delay, so if you put one in and it hasn't been asked yet, don't worry, we'll get to it. But hopefully you guys have a lot of questions that we can field to Deji here. We'll go off some more of the ones that we had already gotten asked. And Clementine, do you want to follow up with this one?
It says, I would like some tips on how to reduce my consumption, so I do not like the idea of smoking and laying around all day doing nothing, as then I have trouble sleeping afterwards.
Great. I think that's a fabulous question. So this is someone who probably gets a sense that consumption is being problematic and affecting day-to-day life or productivity and sleep. So there are different ways of reducing consumption. So if we assume, well, the person indicated smoking, yes. So with smoking, let's start with the basics of cannabis. So cannabis, there's no single cannabis. Cannabis comes in many, many different forms, and it has a whole range of different chemical compounds in it called cannabinoids. And we know one or two better than the rest, and the two we know much better are the ones called THC, which is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, often called THC, and then CBD cannabidiol. But there are many, many others, and the figures continue changing, but we'll say roughly 100 plus. Now, THC is the compound, the bit of cannabis which creates the euphoria, the high. That's a more intoxicating effect. And CBD doesn't have that sort of intoxicating effect. For many people, it's got a more relaxing, calming effect. And what's really important to do is to have a good awareness, an awareness and a literacy of what you're consuming. How much THC is in it, how much CBD is in it. The higher the THC, the greater the risk of problems for some people. And particularly when we're younger, it increases that risk. So I'll illustrate here. If these were joints, they are all different. So they're different compounds in different ratios. So in trying to reduce your consumption, one of the most important bits would be, there's several strategies. One, if you were smoking 10 joints a day, to try and reduce to 9 joints a day, and then gradually 8, 7, and just gradually reducing the quantity. In doing that, you're reducing the total amount of THC being consumed, and gradually would be able to taper off. Another way is if you know the percentage THC in what you're smoking. So if, for instance, what you're smoking is 26, 27, 28, 29% THC, you may wish to drop to a lower percentage, to about 16%, and gradually then drop to about 10% THC. Now, the advantage of that also is you're reducing your total THC daily consumption. In doing that, what can be done is increasing the CBD content, and there's a whole reference to THC CBD ratios. So it's never just the THC content on its own, but how much CBD is there with it, because they do have a sort of yin and yang would be a wrong description, but a sort of a balancing effect. So cutting down the THC, increasing the CBD will be very important processes with reducing consumption. Smoking fewer joints per day, or if it's with a bong, also reduce the total amounts consumed in a day. Taking breaks or distracting, doing other activities in between as well. So I know it's really difficult during COVID when you're housebound or maybe housebound, but if there are ways of doing other really fun, distracting other things, chatting with friends, gaming, exercising, and so on, that will also help with the passage of time. So a number of strategies can be applied. Those are just some examples, and we'll probably, depending on how the questions go, touch on more.
Awesome. Thank you, Deji. So we have a question from the comments now. So Christopher asks, do you suspect youth cannabis use has increased in order to cope with stress and anxiety brought on by COVID-19?
Anecdotally, the answer is yes, although there are a number of studies that have identified increased cannabis consumption during COVID amongst younger people. These are early surveys, and we'll know what the whole package is with time. We know there was significant purchase, and people were really buying as much cannabis as they could during early COVID. But likewise, we can't deduce from that, because buying and hoarding doesn't mean consumption. People were buying a lot of toilet paper as well. It doesn't mean their toilet habits rapidly changed. But there is early evidence suggesting cannabis consumption in some quarters and among some youth did increase. A number of people reported consuming more to cope with stress and anxiety and to while away time. Of course, this is also influenced by its availability. And I suspect in some quarters, people wouldn't have had enough supply to use during the period. But there's sufficient suspicion that in some quarters, younger people increase their use. Conversely, there are some people actually who've taken advantage of this COVID-19 period to quit smoking or quit use. We'll know more as data is being collected over time, and a lot of countries around the world are looking at this closely.
Awesome. And we have the same question, but from your professional experience. So from the people you work with, Have you noticed any difference?
Without breaching any forms of confidentiality, however, I'll say anecdotally, for a number of people, their patterns of cannabis consumption have changed. A larger proportion have unfortunately increased. And the motivations that I've clarified with some people would be, well, I know I'm not going to work tomorrow, so I'm not going to turn up at work stoned. I've got nothing planned for the next day and the day after and the day after, so I might as well smoke and pass away the time. The whole issue of COVID is freaking me out, and I'd rather be in a merry haze than just watching the news over and over. Again, emphasizing that we can't generalize about the cannabis, and I don't know the THC and CBD content. Some may have found the CBD content relaxing for their anxiety, but high potency and frequent use of high potency cannabis with THC in some individuals actually increases the risk of paranoia, feeling suspicious, paranoid, edgy. And a number of people have actually had considerable worsening of their mental health during this COVID period with cannabis use.
Thank you. Clementine, do you want to take this next question? Oops, sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, so sorry. It says, hi all, thank you so much for the awesome stream. Question for Dr. Ayonrinde. For someone with cannabis use disorder, smoker, is it possible to introduce new methods of consumption, i.e. vaporizable concentrates, to reduce the frequency of the use? Thanks.
Great. Well, Armand, that's a great question. And I'd say we're in that period of science that hopefully research will help us know a lot more really quickly. Vaporizing was seen to be a very convenient, measurable way of dosing. And for those, just probably to give a bit of help with the response, the cannabis flower, the green, the flower bits of the flowery tops of the plant, which are often smoked, have greater density of THC in it than other parts. However, this needs to be heated and through a process known as decarboxylation. So it's through heat that the cannabis actually becomes, or the THC becomes active during consumption. Now, the use of vaporizable concentrates, vaporizing and vaping were thought to be convenient till the last 12 months or so, where we've had a number of complex health difficulties and lung disease thought to be associated with vaping. Now, we don't know fully. There have been some suggestions it's to do with some other products in the vaporizing concentrates and so on. So I would say, Arman, as an important step, let's look at the numbers. What percentage THC is in what you're using, and trying to reduce that really gradually. The frequency would also depend on how available. So if you're at work or doing some activities, there are ways of distraction again, or engaging in activities which really wouldn't allow for that consumption. But back to the core question, is it possible to introduce new methods? Yes, it's possible. I'd be careful, because in changing the method and the route, if you unwittingly use a higher potency of THC, you may actually end up consuming more. So if you were smoking dried flower, let's say it's 16% THC, and then started smoking vaporized concentrate, which was 30 or 40% THC, then it may actually be taken on more rather than less. So it's all in the numbers, and getting to know your numbers and your ratios.
Thank you. It's a very comprehensive answer. The next question we have is from Tom Bell. So hi, I'm Tom Bell, MD. 4DA, we have been referring to various combinations of THC and CBD available from licensed outlets. To the best of your knowledge, is there regular sampling, monitoring of the products to not only verify safety of the product, but to confirm the claimed content? I'm hearing some startling concentrations in some of the product. Thank you.
Yes, I think one of the major advantages of having licensed products that are being monitored is the degree in which they are being tested. And if you ever have a look at a test report, they're pretty much being tested for about 50 or nearly 60 different things: herbicides, fungicides, the chemical compounds, the ratios, and so on. And that gives us really, really important information. And Health Canada is very, very particular about this. Every single plant, so every single licensed product should be able to be traced to the plant it came from. And on the labeling, there are some specific numbers on it. So for instance, it could have a number like THC and total THC. It's important that people are aware of this, because THC is the plant that hasn't been decarboxylated, and it's like having a car parked or idling down the street. And then total THC is how much THC you can get from it when it's been heated, decarboxylated. So the car then hitting the motorway or hitting the 401 at maximum speed. By startling concentrations in some products, I'm not sure. I'll respond as I read the question, and it can be clarified, but there are some other products, concentrates, and products such as shatter, and shatter by name, shatter by nature, that are very high in THC content. And these can be up to 70, 80, 90% THC. In such products, the consumption is actually by a process known as dabbing. I mean, people use really, really small quantities, because large quantities will be way, way too much and have considerably high risk. My understanding of what Health Canada is trying to do is to match whatever sort of general products are available in the gray and the black market to be available through licensed producers. And we're still in early days. But there can now be some very, very high concentrations, particularly in concentrates, which, if we look at the numbers, some concentrates can be 60, 70, 80 times or more potent than dried flower as a joint.
Thank you. I think that is a very good answer. And I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions for Deji, please put them in the chat and we'll get right to them. Until then, we'll go back to some of the ones we had beforehand. So this one is more of a statement than a question, but getting your thoughts on this. Clementine, do you want to read it?
Says, I wish more people knew how much it helps at times like this.
So what are your thoughts when you hear something like that, Deji?
Yes, so my understanding, times like this, I presume, and I may be wrong, that the person's referring to this period of COVID and lockdown and isolation, despondency, social distancing, a world that's really different to life as usual. And my reading is this person has found in cannabis some form of companionship, something to be with, and it's helping that person. What do we understand by help? I can only guess. Does this person mean I sleep better? Does this person mean 24 hours can go by and I'm stoned for 18 hours, so I'm not worrying? Does this person mean I sit down and have the munchies and giggle? And whose help is it? So it's a loaded question, but without more, it'll be difficult to say. For a number of people, it probably has hindered at this period. And some younger people may have learned a lot more about their mom or dad they didn't know consumed. Some parents are probably threatened to kick children out of the home because they're consuming too heavily. Again, helps here. We don't know whether it's being consumed as an edible or smoked or infused in a drink. So help is relative, and help for an individual doesn't mean it's good for the person. So I don't have enough information.
Thank you. It's a very complex question without the circumstances, the context around it. It's hard, yeah. So next question we have is from the comments. So from Pamela, do you believe that there is a correlation between cannabis dependency and psychosis in siblings, i.e., a sibling had cannabis-induced psychosis? What is the increased risk for the other sibling if they are also suffering with cannabis dependency?
Pamela, that's a really, really good question. And what we know at the moment is genetic risk. So if I'm a frequent heavy cannabis user and I have developed a psychosis, if I had a sibling, given that we're probably genetically closer than would be with a total stranger, that I would also be at some risk. Now, we don't know enough now, but I would expect as science gets more advanced, we'll be able to identify specifically which genes put people at risk. But as a crude rule of thumb, if, for instance, if I had a big brother who developed terrible psychosis or schizophrenia from frequent, heavy, problematic cannabis use, it makes sense for me to be cautious, because if we share sufficient genetic risk, then I may also be at greater risk of developing. Of course, we know cannabis on its own, while it may increase the risk of psychosis and problematic cannabis use in some individuals, there are other things that may be going on in life, like life events, traumatic events, deaths, trauma, bullying, head injuries, and so on. So really, it's often polyfactorial when these things do happen. However, coming back to the basics, if I have a sibling with problematic cannabis use or who's developed a psychosis, till we have way better information regarding genetic testing, I would be cautious.
Thank you. So going back to the comments here, Clementine?
So Sunny is asking, is there a higher likelihood of triggering psychosis from edibles, assuming that they were the same THC content?
Yes, well, I will reemphasize the bit about the numbers. Now, edibles and smoked, so if I had something, a product that had, let's say, the same amount of THC content, one of the significant differences between edibles and smoked is, well, one goes through the lungs and the other goes through the gastrointestinal system, and it's metabolized and broken down. Now, one goes to the brain much more rapidly when it's smoked. So it's inhaled through the lungs into the bloodstream to the brain. Often within 10 minutes, there's a visible effect. While edibles go a bit more like a submarine, and there's like a slow release. It could take up to half an hour or 2 hours for them to begin to peak in the bloodstream. But if I consume frequent, heavy quantities of edibles, one, I'm more likely to have cannabis and cannabis metabolites in my system for longer periods of time with acute use. But I could easily consume an edible which would be way, way, way more potent than smoking. One important factor to add is cannabis, unlike alcohol, and alcohol really roughly takes about 1 hour to clear 1 unit of alcohol from the body. Cannabis somehow just loves fat. It loves the body's fat and tucks away in it. So you have the THC tucked away in the body's fat reserve. So in someone as, should I say, chubby or rotund like me, around my belly, my, and other bits, So it's tucked away there, and with frequent heavy use is then really slowly released. And that's why for frequent heavy consumption with high potency, you can pretty much have cannabis metabolites in the system for weeks, 4 to 6 weeks still there. So simple question, simple answer, is there a likelihood of triggering psychosis from edibles? The answer is yes, if it's consumed in high dose, high potency, frequently, and the person has the sort of underlying risk factors for developing psychosis, like a strong family history or a past history of mental health difficulties and the vulnerability. So I sort of couch my questions in that not everyone that consumes will develop a psychosis, and we know that. However, is it worth the gamble, particularly if we've got a developing brain, which I'll hope to comment on during the Q&A. And that's where it gets tricky. But edibles are not benign. And you can easily get way, way, way more intoxicated on an edible than you would with smoking. And the simple reason being, it's just a slow response. So if I, for instance, smoked a joint, and I expected it to have a hit within 10, 15 minutes, with my edible, nothing happened. I could consume during that latent period, that gap, consume more and more and more. And I may end up then consuming the equivalent of 5, 10, 15, 20 joints, and then I get hit. And I've heard, interesting from some young people I've worked with, describing waking up stoned. So they consumed the edible, they didn't feel too much of an adverse effect. They go to bed and then they wake up absolutely stoned. And that's what an edible can do. Well, with smoking, once that intoxication's there, it's difficult to keep pushing smoke.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point, that like the amount of time they last and the amount of time they take to hit is so different. It can trip a lot of people up.
Yeah.
So now Kira has a question. So thanking you very much for the excellent answers so far. And saying something I've noticed is that young people sometimes are hesitant to get medical help, especially for their mental health. In your experience, would you say it's more likely that someone comes in unnecessarily, or that they don't come in for a consultation when it would actually be beneficial for them?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Kira. And the evidence we have so far from the Canadian Cannabis Survey is only about 2 to 3% of people who do have problematic cannabis use amongst the population actually seek help. And we've got to ask ourselves also as health professionals, what's it about our mental health services that may or may not make it attractive? Is it that people are getting stigmatized? Is it that people are scared to be labeled? Is it that people are so distressed with their symptoms? Are we unclear about how they can seek help, and what sort of help we can offer? Or have people actually had such adverse experiences? And arguably, are we also seeking help and we find that the person we're talking to doesn't really understand cannabis? So there's a heck of a difference between someone asking, do you smoke cannabis? Do you know it's bad for you? If you smoke cannabis, you're going to go mad. So stop it now. And the language of medicine has changed considerably with legalization, because it's more of trying to understand why people use, what sort of difficulties they have, whether or not they may have developed a cannabis use disorder, the impact it may be having on educational performance or work performance, and so on. So the second part of the question being, in my experience, is it more likely that someone comes in unnecessarily? I would doubt. I mean, by the time a person's seeking help, please offer. Even if it's helping clarify, it may be helping improve their cannabis literacy. And on the whole, no one chooses, well, no one's probably generalizing, but a severe mental disorder or a panic attack or psychotic symptoms unearthing of a bipolar episode, a manic episode, social anxiety, none of those are fun. And people don't actively seek out, what can I do? Now, I'd like to be psychotic and paranoid and fear for my life today. No. So when people do seek help, it's because they've probably gone through a number of stages. They've thought very carefully about it. And I would say when we do come across people who are looking for help, that we're compassionate, we show understanding, we don't stigmatize, we listen, we support their cannabis literacy in such a way that they can make informed decisions. And on the whole, when people are sufficiently informed and can make those right decisions, oftentimes people will make decisions in their better health interest than otherwise. So I think we should make it more accessible. The work that's been done by the Canadian Schizophrenia Society and Youthrex and many other health organizations to raise awareness is pretty cool. I would say for younger people, if you've got dinosaurs in clinic, I'll add myself to the list of dinosaurs. If it's not a sort of milieu that allows comfortable conversation, people chicken out. And if we don't make ourselves available, they're going to go to Dr. Google or speak with a friend of a friend and may or may not get misinformation. So we really should make ourselves more accessible. And I think it's very important that working with youth, nothing about youth without involving youth, and having young people actually advise and support services and how to best deliver care for their demographic.
Awesome, thank you, Deji. It brings us to that idea of nothing about us without us, and that if people are coming in, they have a reason for coming in. So take it seriously. Yeah. Clementine, do you want to take this next one?
So Catherine asks, can you provide any advice for parents when a young person use might be getting problematic? It's hard to know sometimes when we may be quote unquote normal, what may be normal levels of social/recreational use, and when it may be more of a dependency, and what might parents be looking for?
Well, great question, Catherine. And it's a theme that comes up over and over and over again. How do two generations talk about a tricky topic like cannabis use, sex, and other things? So I would say for parents, in as much as it may feel really counterintuitive and we may have been raised under really much stricter conditions, don't use drugs, otherwise you'll get into trouble and so on, to allow sufficient dialogue to understand what's going on. Hi, Deji, I've noticed, you're smoking a lot more, or, I notice you're using quite a bit of cannabis at the moment. How are things with you? Or is there anything else going on in your life? And so on. And really trying to understand what and why the person may be using. Now, sometimes it's peer pressure. Friends use, and if I don't use, I won't be able to hang out with friends. I'll feel really odd. There's a lot of pressure among some youth populations for others to use, and people feel really left out and lonely. What's a normal level of social recreational use? That's a tricky one, and I'll try not to be too clinical, because if we use word terms like cannabis use disorder, if my grades are dropping in class, so here I was probably getting around 80%, 85%, and my grades have started dropping into the 50s. I'm beginning to get into trouble in school. I've been in trouble for driving impaired. I've become way more irritable, and my self-care has reduced, and I spend a lot more time seeking cannabis or cannabis products to use, then that is pretty much a cannabis use disorder, and it's problematic. So it's quite different to perhaps using over the weekend under safe conditions with friends or socially, in relatively small quantities. And this, again, can be really, really tricky because we now have, even in Canada here, households where 3 generations may use a cannabis product for different reasons. Grandpa using for medical purposes, for, let's say, pain of some sort. Dad or mum using for PTSD. And then you've got young Johnny using for managing his own anxiety. So it's a tricky dialogue. I would say, first then, as a parent, I would seek to enhance my own cannabis literacy and have a basic understanding in discussing with a young person in my home that I'm concerned about, allow myself to be ignorant and to be educated in a non-judgmental way. So tell me more about it. So when you smoke it or when you have this, how does it make you feel? Are there any other ways you can use it that way? And develop a trusting dialogue with this. It's all the trickier, as mentioned, because there's a lot of it out there. It's legally available. And it's much more difficult to enforce. We know anecdotally in some households during this COVID period, there's been a fair bit of conflicts within homes regarding parents and their adolescents or young people living at home and nearly overdosing on each other's company. So it's all in the relationship, and mum, dad, or child parent relationships can't be generalized. So good luck. There's some amazing resources probably available through the websites as well. So there's some really amazing resources for parents and families that will probably be made available through the websites supported by Health Canada. So it's well, trusting, or at least a communicating relationship, even if there's mistrust, to get a measure. A tricky one, but don't give up, all parents.
I think that message of don't give up is a really good one to leave it on there, because like sometimes I know my parents almost gave up, but glad they didn't. Moving on to the next one. Pamela asks, how can people who are suffering from cannabis use disorder and coexisting mental health issues such as anxiety seek help? What options are available that are the most accessible?
Very good question again, Pamela. And it's a tricky one because a lot of young people do genuinely use cannabis, not because they're trying to get high, not because they want to be on the rooftop, but because they're anxious. And so here I am feeling anxious. I use some cannabis, which has a ratio of CBD in it and maybe a little bit of THC. And some people generally feel more relaxed. And I can actually learn quite quickly that each time I'm anxious that way, that if I use a bit of cannabis, I feel a bit more relaxed. And with the passage of time, I use the word, dependent on it. So anxiety then means using cannabis. The tricky bit for many people is cannabis can actually worsen. Some cannabis ratios can worsen anxiety. So if the THC content goes up, rather than relax me, it will make me way more anxious, jittery. And there's a particular form of anxiety that's worsened with high THC in some individuals, which is social anxiety disorder. So here I am in the shops, and I'm not comfortable. I feel people are looking at me. And this isn't just paranoia, it's feeling really, really anxious. Now, when we've got the cannabis use disorder, as described earlier, with coexisting other mental health issues, one of the things that's tricky is if I'm reducing my cannabis use with a view to reducing my psychosis, what do I do next? Now, if it's done really rapidly, some people may have cannabis withdrawal symptoms. Become jittery, have nightmares, become more agitated, more irritable. And the cannabis withdrawal syndrome is a real phenomenon. Some people may actually require medication and treatment for the coexisting mental health issue. And the question really is, how can they seek help? I would suggest to speak, a common pathway is through family physicians, and to let the family physician know of the concern, and where possible to get a referral to a youth mental health service. Over the last 2-3 years, youth mental health services have shown way more awareness of cannabis and have more experience in working with people with problematic cannabis use. There are fora like this, and I would say the work being done by organizations like Schizophrenia Society of Canada, Youth Rex, and a number of other organizations really also helps young people engage discreetly and get advice without the stigma. It's not cool saying you've got a mental illness, and sometimes the diagnoses can carry heavy labels that affect people, and people being very wary of this. So I'll say a discreet chat, where possible, a discussion with family physician. If one has enough insight into the fact that it's problematic or is a disorder, to get help there. There are also self-help options, and dialing down the potency and some of the points we made earlier. Quick points. So in my previous service, which was an early psychosis intervention service, 80% of the young people who attend there self-reported cannabis use. And we may think, oh, well, maybe they were just talking it, but no, over 70% had a positive urine test for cannabis. So it's real, and people should seek help. And I'm absolutely thrilled to say the majority of people who worked through a service, that particular service, and many others like that, with early intervention, were able to adjust, reduce, or become abstinent from cannabis, which was really important and good for their mental health.
Awesome. Thank you, Deji. And I think we have time for one last one. So Clementine, do you want to finish us off?
So lastly, Tom Bell says, Dr. Ayonrinde, what sense do you get about social media's contribution to cannabis use in youth? This might be hard to estimate, but just because of recent data regarding the impact of social media on anxiety and depression in youth. Thanks.
Yeah, social media comes with it's probably a two-edged sword. We're using a medium now, so I'm not going to knock it. And we've been able to stay connected with the use of social media. So it's certainly had a fantastic role in some way. However, there is sufficient evidence suggests being bombarded with so much in cyberspace and over social media has caused an increase of anxiety, particularly in vulnerable younger people. It's really becoming problematic, and I would say, as a physician now, so while I may ask people about how their educational life is and their social life and their family life and work life, I also ask people about how their life is in cyberspace. How's your life in social media? And people may reveal, oh, I'm being bullied on Facebook, or, you know, I don't have enough likes on Instagram, or someone said something nasty to me on Twitter or Snapchat and so on. So social media cannot be ignored in the day-to-day life of younger people. It's another virtual space out there that people live in. It's a culture. It does, by its existence, have an impact on day-to-day social and mental well-being. Its contribution to cannabis use in youth, I will not be able to say with enough confidence whether there's a cause and effect. But my, oh my, there's a cannabis world out there. If you look at the music industry, there are musicians, for instance, on YouTube who've had billions, not even millions, but billions of hits for their weed songs. And cannabis songs and the culture are really embedded in youth culture and growing up. I wouldn't be hypocritical about it. In an older generation, they had their Bob Marleys, they had other people as well. So cannabis has been present in different cultures, whether it's flower power and the current ones. The one important distinction would be generationally. The potency of cannabis has gone up nearly 10 to 20 fold over 2 to 3 generations. So what grandma and grandpa used may have been like 1 to 3% THC compared to what some people are consuming now, which will be in the 20s, 30s, or if it's things like shatter, close to 80, 90% THC. So things continue to evolve. Youth culture changes. One generation didn't have social media, but they had their own way of using. Anxiety and depression in youth is certainly problematic. Cannabis' role in that space for a lot of young people is also problematic for some people. And maybe I should be optimistic and say a bit about why we talk a lot of concern about the developing brain. So it's not a question, but I'll just throw in my response anyway. And that is, the brain is believed to develop till around the age of 25. And what's really important is, as the brain continues to develop, it produces way more neurons than we need. So think of it like a building with electricians. You've got wires all over the place and like old dial-up internet. And it's going on and on and on. Fuses are blowing, and someone wakes up and say, "Yeah, friends, I think we should go off to Australia today. Yeah, let's go." And they realize, hold on, how do we get to Australia? And that's what the adolescent brain is like. Mistakes, errors, and all of us have been there. And then as the brain's getting more mature, the fuses start getting repaired, and it goes from analog dial-up internet to fiber optic. And that's a process of myelination, whereby the transmission is way quicker. The brain starts pruning all the excess, and the electricians in the brain, electricians in quotes, start tidying up. And around the age of 25, this process starts coming to, on the whole, starts slowing down and coming to an end. And the electricians say, "Okay, chaps, you're 25 now, you're mature, have a good life." So it's really important that what we do with our mental health, with our brains, with exposure to any psychoactive substance or trauma during those developmental years can leave imprints in our brains and affect our general mental health for years to come. So those developing years are really critical. And I'd say if you're a frequent, heavy, problematic user approaching the age of 25, there's still time. Don't give up, because every bit you do can actually improve your brain kit for the rest of your life.
Awesome. Thank you, Deji, for your amazing answers, and thank you everyone for posting them. I know I learned a lot today, and I thought I knew a lot about cannabis already. Yeah, so on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you for your time. And for those of you watching, if you enjoyed this, if you learned something, if you thought it was helpful, give us a like, join us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're on all the communities, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Right, Elias, can I squeeze in an attempt at a magic trick?
100%.
Okay, so I've not rehearsed this, but what we used to think we knew about cannabis, we thought there was just one single cannabis. Where's the position? There we are. And we thought there was just one single cannabis. And then around 1964, THC was discovered. So we learned there was actually something called THC and not just one single cannabis. And as we've found out more and more with research, we've discovered things like CBD as well. So there's THC and CBD. But that's not what cannabis is all about, because there are many other cannabinoids that we don't know about, and they all have actions. So there's no single cannabis. It's a combination of cannabinoids, and they're all interacting in their own different ways with each of us in different ways. So there's no single cannabis. It depends on all the ratios and the combinations. And as we consume, we can't generalize. So the message really is there's no single cannabis, different strokes for different folks. and continue to raise your awareness. It can only be good for you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. A. And I think that's a perfect place to leave it. For everyone else, hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you.
You.